I want you to try to paint this picture in your mind for a second.
Okay.
It is May 11th, 2026. And right now, just bobbing out there in the warm waters off the coast of Oman, there are these massive, multi-million-dollar super tankers.
Right.
And they're essentially just parked in the ocean, like they aren't moving at all.
It's just sitting there.
And it's not because they don't have fuel or, because their engines failed. It's because an invisible piece of paper, a maritime insurance policy, just vanished overnight.
Exactly.
And because those ships are just sitting idle, 20% of the world's energy supply has just been, wiped off the map.
It's just gone. I mean, we are looking at a system in total arrest here.
Yeah.
According to the sources we're digging into today, the Strait of Hormuz is completely choked off.
Which is terrifying.
It is. Traffic has plummeted from this steady rhythm of like 70 massive vessels a day down to an absolute trickle. And the fallout, it isn't just a localized military problem. It's this massive hemorrhage bleeding into literally every single aspect of the global economy.
Right, which is why we are doing this deep dive today. Welcome, everyone. Our mission today is to unpack the anatomy of what the documents are calling the largest oil supply shock in human history.
It really is unprecedented.
We are breaking down the massive fallout of the 2026 Iran war, which, as the sources detail, was triggered by those U.S. and Israeli strikes back in February.
Right, and the massive retaliation that followed that.
Exactly. We're going to explore why the United States military, the most powerful armed force ever assembled, literally cannot simply flip a switch to force this waterway open.
Yeah, it's not that simple at all.
And we'll look inside the incredibly stubborn, deeply entrenched survival economy of Iran. Plus, we're going to forecast where the sources say this unprecedented crisis is actually heading.
Because it's heading somewhere very dangerous.
It is. I mean, think of the Strait of Hormuz as the main artery of the global industrial body, right? When you clamp it down, the whole system immediately starts shutting down.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
And right now, the globe is feeling severe chest pains.
Oh, absolutely. And to understand the severity of those chest pains, you really have to look past the military headlines.
Right.
We have to examine this multi-domain collision that's happening right now in the documents.
What do you mean by multi-domain collision?
Well, the sources emphasize that we're watching geography, global macroeconomics, and asymmetric warfare just crash into each other.
Okay, I see.
Like these small, incredibly cheap tactical moves, a few submerged mines, maybe a handful of drones, they are literally wiping trillions of dollars off the global GDP.
Trillions. With a T.
Trillions, yeah.
Well, let's start with the sheer scale of the disruption, because the math here in the sources is just terrifying.
The numbers are staggering.
So, in normal times, before February of 2026, the Strait of Hormuz handled about 20 to 21 million barrels of crude oil and petroleum products every single day.
Every single day.
For you listening, that represents over a quarter of all seaborne oil trade globally.
Right.
But it's not just crude oil, is it?
No, not at all. We are also talking about 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, or LNG.
And the vast majority of that comes from Qatar, right?
Exactly. And LNG, as the documents point out, is a particularly fragile supply chain.
How so?
Well, you can't just pump natural gas into any standard cargo ship, right?
Right.
It has to be super cool. We're talking minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah, it happens at these massive multi-billion-dollar liquefaction facilities in Qatar. Then it's loaded onto highly specialized cryogenic ships.
So it's a huge logistical undertaking.
The delicate logistical ballet, the sources call it, and it gets transported to custom regasification terminals, mostly over in Asia.
But when the strikes happened in February, that whole ballet just collapsed.
Completely collapsed. The documents state that at the peak of the disruptions, between 8 and 15 million barrels per day of oil equivalent just vanished.
Just wiped right off the market.
Poof, gone.
Which obviously instantly triggers a massive market panic.
Oh, immediate panic.
The sources say Brent crude spiked about 10% overnight.
Yep.
And there were these worst-case scenario models flying around Wall Street threatening $130, even $200 a barrel.
Which would be catastrophic.
Right now, as the documents place us here in mid-May, we're hovering around $100 to $104 a barrel.
Yeah.
And U.S. gasoline prices spiked over 40% in some regions, hitting like $4.50 or more a gallon.
Which people definitely felt at the pump.
Exactly. But for LNG, The situation was so catastrophic that Qatar had to declare force majeure.
Yeah, that was a huge move.
Tell us what that actually means on the ground, because that's a legal term, right?
Right. Force majeure is essentially a legal nuclear option in contract law. It literally translates to superior force. So when Qatar invokes this, they are telling the world's largest energy buyers, governments and mega corporations in Japan, South Korea, China.
But they aren't getting their gas.
Exactly. They're saying unforeseeable, unavoidable circumstances make it impossible to fulfill their delivery contracts.
Wow. So they're legally absolving themselves of the liability.
Yes. They're saying it's not our fault, we can't deliver.
And the result of that has to be instant chaos.
Absolute chaos. Buyers are forced onto the spot market, basically bidding against each other for whatever scraps of energy are floating around the Atlantic or the Pacific.
Which just drives prices into the stratosphere.
Exactly.
And this creates a profound structural divide in the global economy almost immediately, according to the source material.
Yeah, you see a massive split.
You end up with these massive macro winners and losers.
Right.
Like net exporters, the US, Canada, Brazil, Norway, they actually see massive revenue gains from this.
Yeah, they're suddenly making a lot more money.
The documents mention Saudi Aramco even managed to activate their east-west pipeline, completely bypassing the strait.
Yeah, pumping oil directly to the Red Sea. They really capitalized on that $104 a barrel price.
But what about the losers? Like the importers in Asia?
For importers in Asia, the sources frame this as an existential threat.
Existential.
Yes. Countries like China, India, Japan, South Korea, they rely heavily on Gulf energy to keep their manufacturing sectors functioning.
Right. If they don't have energy, they don't have factories.
Exactly. If this drags on, factories go dark. And the macroeconomic models and the documents for a prolonged closure are just grim.
Let's get into those numbers.
So a short disruption of a week or two costs the global economy around $330 billion.
Which is already a massive hit.
It is. But a 3 to 6 month closure. The sources say that threatens a $2.2 trillion hit.
2.2 trillion.
Yeah, that's 2% of the entire global GDP, just gone.
That's hard to even wrap your head around.
And it gets worse. It would drive inflation up by 2.5 percentage points globally.
Yep.
Central banks would be entirely paralyzed. The documents warn of facing a 1973-style stagflation.
Stagflation, right, where prices skyrocket but economic growth completely stalls out.
Exactly. It's a nightmare scenario for economists.
And the craziest part of all this, to me at least, is that Iran didn't even need to form a physical wall of warships to achieve this.
No, they really didn't.
The sources make it clear that the insurance market did the heavy lifting for them.
That's exactly right. The commercial shipping industry is entirely beholden to maritime insurance underwriters.
Like the ones based in Lloyd's of London. Right.
Primarily there, yes.
Yeah.
To move a supertanker carrying, say, $100 million worth of crude, you need hull insurance for the ship itself and cargo insurance for the oil.
Makes sense.
But when a conflict zone expands, those underwriters apply what's called a war risk premium.
And normally what is that premium?
Before the crisis, it was just a tiny fraction of a percent of the ship's total value.
But then it spiked.
Oh, drastically. In the span of a few days, those premiums spiked anywhere from 5% to over 1,000%.
1,000% increase.
Yeah, meaning the cost to insure the voyage became more expensive than the actual profit of selling the oil.
So you'd basically be losing money by moving the ship.
Exactly the issue. And the sources point out that in many cases, underwriters simply pulled coverage entirely.
They just said, we're not covering you at all.
Right. And if a ship owner cannot insure the vessel, they absolutely will not risk sailing it through a gauntlet of coastal missiles.
I mean, I wouldn't either.
So the strait was effectively closed commercially by actuaries and risk assessors sitting in London before the military situation even fully materialized.
That is just mind-blowing. Okay, let me play devil's advocate for the listener here for a second.
Go for it.
If you are sitting in the United States right now, you might look at this and think, wait a minute. The U.S. is the largest oil producer in the world.
Right.
We have the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We are geographically isolated. Aside from paying a little bit more to fill up my SUV, why should I care about a choke point halfway across the world?
It's a fair question, but the sources are very clear on this. The modern globalized economy does not allow for true isolation.
Okay, break that down for us.
While the U.S. does produce its own crude, the secondary effects of this crisis act like a massive, invisible global tax.
Right.
Consider the European industrial base, for example. Germany and Italy heavily rely on imported energy.
So when their energy costs explode.
Their heavy manufacturing sectors risk going into deep recessions, and a recessionary Europe stops buying American exports.
Ah, I see.
Plus, the higher maritime freight costs make every single manufactured good imported into the U.S. Electronics, car parts, clothing exponentially more expensive.
So it cascades.
It cascades violently.
Yeah.
But the documents highlight that the most devastating secondary effect is actually in agriculture.
Really? Agriculture?
Yes. Modern farming relies entirely on synthetic fertilizers, specifically ammonia.
Okay.
And ammonia is synthesized using natural gas in what's called the Haber-Bosch process.
So if you don't have natural gas.
You don't have fertilizer. When natural gas supplies are choked off, fertilizer plants shut down.
Wow, so this affects the food supply directly.
Exactly. The sources note we are already seeing the precursors to major food crises and agricultural collapse in Africa and emerging markets.
It's awful.
So the United States might have its own oil, sure, but it exists in this fragile, highly integrated web. It requires the Strait of Hormuz to keep the price of everything from a microchip to a loaf of bread stable.
Which brings us to the most obvious, glaring question of this whole deep dive.
Right.
If the financial pain is this agonizing, if literally trillions of dollars are vanishing and global agriculture is teetering on the edge, why hasn't the United States military just stepped in?
It's what everyone asks.
I mean, the U.S. spends nearly $1 trillion a year on defense. We have stealth bombers, laser weapons, massive aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
How is it physically possible that the U.S. Navy can't just sail in, clear out whatever is blocking the way, and force this 21-mile stretch of water open?
It seems logical, right? Yep. But the documents emphasize that brute force is entirely the wrong tool for the specific geography of the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay, why is that?
Well, the strait is not the open ocean. It is incredibly narrow. The actual shipping lanes themselves are only a couple of miles wide in each direction.
Really? Just a couple of miles?
Yes. It is also relatively shallow, and the seabed is a total nightmare of acoustic clutter.
Acoustic clutter?
Yeah, sunken ships, old pipelines, decades of metallic debris just sitting down there.
So it's a terrible environment for using sonar.
It is the absolute worst possible environment. And Iran's primary area denial weapon in this scenario isn't a fleet of massive conventional destroyers.
What is it then?
It is the naval mine.
Mines.
Yes, naval mines are incredibly cheap. They range from a few thousand to a few tens of thousands of dollars each.
And they can do a massive amount of damage.
Massive. And they can be laid in the dead of night by small, untraceable dhows, fast-attack speedboats, or even midget submarines.
Oh, wow.
The sources indicate we are talking about potentially thousands of mines.
That's a literal minefield.
Exactly. Some are simple contact mines, but others are acoustic or magnetic.
Meaning what? They listen for the ships.
Basically, they sit on the seabed and wait for the specific sound signature or magnetic field of a massive commercial tanker to pass overhead before detonating.
But surely the U.S. Navy has systems to clear them, right? Like, that's a basic capability.
You'd think so, but this is where the documents reveal a severe structural deficit.
Ooh.
U.S. mine countermeasures, or MCM, are currently at a historic low point.
Why is that?
Well, the traditional workhorses for this mission were the wooden-hulled Avenger-class minesweepers.
Wait, wooden hull, like literally made of wood?
Yeah, wood or fiberglass, so they don't trigger magnetic mines.
Oh, that makes sense.
But those, along with the massive MH-53E Sea Dragon helicopters they used, have largely been retired or are suffering from extreme maintenance backlogs.
Okay, but you don't just retire a critical capability without a backup plan. What replaced them?
The Navy transitioned the mine-clearing mission to the littoral combat ship, the LCS.
Okay, and how did that go?
Not well. The plan was to utilize a modular approach with unmanned systems. The concept was that an LCS would stay far out of the minefield and send in these remote multi-mission vehicles.
Like aquatic drones.
Exactly. Aquatic drones meant to hunt and neutralize mines using advanced sonar.
Sounds good in theory.
In theory, yes. But the reality, according to the sources, is that these systems have faced catastrophic reliability issues.
Like they just break down.
Yeah, the integration of the towing systems, the sonar fidelity in those cluttered waters we talked about, the communication links, they have routinely failed in testing and operational deployments.
Wow.
The documents state there are very few fully operational, reliable MCM packages available in the theater today.
Okay, let me try to visualize this for a second. Clearing a naval minefield isn't like dropping a bunker buster bomb and blowing everything up all at once.
No, not at all.
It's this agonizingly slow process. Like you have to creep a sonar drone forward, it detects an anomaly.
Right.
Then you have to send an underwater camera to see if it's actually an acoustic mine or just, I don't know, a sunken refrigerator from 1985.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, if it is a mine, you have to send a neutralization charge to blow it up without accidentally triggering all the other mines around it.
That's the process. And remember, you have to do all of that slow, tedious work while operating within range of Iran's coastal anti-ship missiles, like the Noor.
Oh, right. They're shooting at you the whole time.
Yes. And you're constantly defending against swarms of explosive drones and fast attack boats, too.
It's like a SWAT team trying to clear a dark hoarder's living room that is absolutely laced with tripwires while someone is actively throwing firecrackers through the window.
That is a perfect analogy.
I mean, the SWAT team might have machine guns and body armor, but that firepower is basically useless for untangling a tripwire in the dark.
That is the exact tactical reality described in the documents. Full clearance of the strait wouldn't take days. It would take weeks, if not months, of painstaking, highly vulnerable labor.
And that completely undermines the idea of military escorts for the commercial ships, right?
Yes. Early in the crisis, the U.S. attempted something called Project Freedom, providing a defensive umbrella for individual tankers.
How did that work?
A U.S. destroyer would sail right alongside a commercial ship, using its phalanx cannons and missiles to shoot down incoming Iranian drones and sink fast attack boats.
But you can't scale that. You can't put a billion-dollar Arleigh Burke-class destroyer next to 70 different commercial ships every single day.
You really can't. It requires a completely unsustainable diversion of assets.
Because you'd have to pull ships from everywhere else.
Exactly. You would have to pull cruisers, destroyers, and aircraft away from the Indo-Pacific, away from the Atlantic, leaving massive strategic vulnerabilities elsewhere.
Just to move cargo.
Right. You'd be entering a perpetual, grinding war of attrition just to escort oil tankers.
And this brings us to the strategic restraint currently being exercised by the Trump administration, according to the sources.
Yeah, the political calculus of a forcible entry is just toxic.
Because forcible action means dead American sailors.
Yes, and it risks sunken commercial ships right in the shipping lanes, which would create a catastrophic environmental oil spill.
And that would ensure insurance rates remain at zero indefinitely anyway.
Exactly. The domestic blowback of starting a massive, open-ended regional war just over oil transits is massive.
So the U.S. shifted tactics.
They did. Rather than rushing into the minefield, the sources know the U.S.
They're cutting off Tehran's ability to export whatever oil they manage to load on their end.
Precisely.
The logic there is really fascinating. It's like the U.S. is effectively looking at China, Japan, and Europe. The economy is actually facing the $100 plus oil and the factory shutdowns.
Right.
And they're saying, we aren't going to bear the full cost in American blood and treasure to solve a problem that hurts you more than it hurts us. You need to step up.
It is a deliberate passing of the burden, which directly explains the tense, fragile diplomatic reality the sources describe for mid-May 2026.
Because the world realized unilateral U.S. military action was off the table.
Yes, so diplomacy becomes the only avenue left.
The documents mention that on April 8th, Pakistan actually managed to mediate a ceasefire.
They did, but the situation is incredibly precarious.
It's like a no war, no peace standoff.
Very much so.
Yeah.
The sources note that Trump has publicly rejected Iran's counterproposal as totally unacceptable.
Why?
He argued that Iran is refusing to make adequate concessions on its nuclear program.
So into this vacuum, a really fascinating multinational dynamic is emerging.
Yeah, we're seeing what the documents call a coalition of the reluctant.
Born entirely out of economic desperation.
Exactly. The UK and France have taken the lead on this, organizing a massive summit in Paris with over 50 nations.
And what are they trying to achieve?
They are trying to build a post-ceasefire defensive coalition. Structurally, it's very similar to Operation Aspides in the Red Sea from a few years ago.
But when you look at the roster of this coalition, the motivations are all over the map.
They really are.
Like, you have Gulf states like the UAE and Bahrain. They are desperate to join because their economies are bleeding out.
Right.
But they are also terrified. If they actively participate in military operations against Iran, their critical infrastructure, specifically their water desalination plants, becomes an immediate target.
Which is a huge vulnerability.
Yeah, the sources point out that a few missiles hitting desalination facilities in the UAE means the country runs out of drinking water in a matter of days.
It's a massive risk for them.
Yeah.
Then you have the Asian importers, like Japan and South Korea.
What's their stance?
Well, they are entirely reliant on the U.S. security umbrella for their national defense, but they are utterly dependent on Middle Eastern energy.
Talk about a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. They are offering logistical support, radar sharing, perhaps some funding, but they are drawing a hard line against frontline combat.
And the Europeans.
The Europeans are bending over backwards to frame the entire Paris coalition as purely defensive.
Because they don't want to poke the bear.
Exactly. They want to secure navigation, but they are terrified of being dragged into a direct kinetic war involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
Which brings us to the most glaring paradox of all in these documents.
Oh, yeah.
The countries most reliant on this oil, specifically China, are the least likely to join the West in actually shooting at Iran.
Right?
How is Beijing playing this, according to the sources?
China and Russia are playing a completely different geopolitical game here.
How so?
They have much closer strategic and economic ties to Tehran. So rather than joining a Western-led armada, China is actively bypassing the chaos through back-channel diplomacy.
Oh, sneaky.
Yeah. Because of their strategic partnership with Iran, Chinese-linked shipping companies have managed to negotiate limited transit permissions.
Really? So their ships are getting through?
Some of them, yes. They're leveraging their relationship to secure their own energy lifelines, while the West scrambles to build a defensive wall.
It's literal global chess.
It is. But every single one of these moves, from the U.S. blockade to the French coalition to Chinese back-channeling, relies entirely on trying to anticipate what Iran will do next.
Right. And to predict Iran's moves, you have to peer inside the country itself.
You do.
You have to understand a regime that, as the documents detail, just survived the assassination of its supreme leader.
Yeah, that was a massive event. The late February U.S. and Israeli strikes achieved what many intelligence analysts thought would be a decapitating blow.
They assassinated Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei.
Exactly. And in many personalized authoritarian systems, losing the absolute apex leader triggers an immediate chaotic collapse or a bloody civil war among the generals.
But the Islamic Republic didn't fracture.
No, it didn't. The succession mechanisms actually worked.
His son, Mojtaba Khamenei, just stepped right into the power vacuum.
You did. Because, as the sources explain, the Iranian state is explicitly engineered to survive decapitation.
How is it engineered for that?
It utilizes a dual military structure.
Oh.
You have the conventional army, the Artesh, which is responsible for traditional border defense and conventional warfare.
Okay, standard military.
Right. But the true power, the ideological and economic engine of the state, is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
And it's the IRGC driving the conflict right now, right?
Yes. The documents state that Commander Ahmad Fahidi is making the war decisions.
Got it.
And the IRGC isn't just a military branch. It is a deeply entrenched network, backed by the Basij paramilitary forces.
You are the bosses.
They are embedded in every neighborhood, every university, every factory. If a localized uprising starts, the security apparatus is literally already physically standing in the room.
So it is absolute internal control.
Absolute control. But military and security dominance alone doesn't explain how they are surviving a blockade that has caused 73% deflation.
73%.
Yeah. The survival is rooted in a specific economic doctrine formulated in the 2010s, which the sources call the resistance economy, or Eqtisad-e-Mogavamati.
Let's look at the sheer economic trauma they are enduring right now under this doctrine.
It's severe.
The rial has collapsed to roughly 1.3 to 1.8 million to a single U.S. dollar.
Wow.
Food inflation is stratospheric. The estimated physical damage to their infrastructure from the war is $270 billion.
Which is massive.
That's 57% of their entire GDP, according to the documents.
Think about that.
How does any society absorb a 57% GDP hit without collapsing entirely into anarchy?
Through the brutal application of that resistance economy.
Okay, break that down.
The doctrine operates on the paranoid, but from their perspective, historically validated assumption that Iran will always be under siege by the West.
Okay.
Its core tenets are aggressive import substitution, a strict refusal to take on external debt that could be leveraged against them, and the enforcement of severe austerity.
So they just tighten their belts to an extreme degree.
Exactly. For example, because Iran has domestic oil and natural gas production, alongside substantial domestic refining capacity, they can keep fuel flowing to their own trucks and power plants.
Even if they can't export a single drop of crude.
Right. The internal physical economy doesn't halt. The regime's leadership frames this endurance as jihadi management.
Jihadi management, that's a strong term.
It is. They are turning economic suffering into a holy war against external enemies.
But the public-facing resistance economy,
Yeah.
the domestic refining and austerity, that's just the surface.
Oh, yeah. That's just what they want people to see.
The documents say the real lifeblood keeping the regime afloat is the IRGC shadow economy.
And the sheer scale of the IRGC's economic empire is just staggering.
How big are we talking?
Estimates in the sources suggest they control anywhere from 30 to 60% of Iran's total GDP.
That is insane for a military branch.
They operate the Khatam al-Anbiya construction headquarters, which monopolizes massive national infrastructure contracts, dams, highways, pipelines.
Wow.
Furthermore, they control what are called the bonyads.
The bonyads, those are really fascinating in the reading. Explain how these work.
So following the 1979 revolution, the new regime seized all the massive assets of the Shah and his network.
All right, all that wealth.
These assets were rolled into bonyads, which are essentially parastatal charitable foundations.
Charities.
Well, on paper, they exist to support veterans and the poor.
But in reality?
In reality, they are massive, tax-exempt, completely unaccountable conglomerates that control vast swaths of real estate, heavy manufacturing, and agriculture.
And who do they answer to?
They answer only to the supreme leader. They operate completely off the official government budget.
And the mechanism that feeds billions of dollars into this shadow empire, according to the documents, is the shadow fleet.
Yes, the shadow fleet is crucial.
To bypass the U.S. blockade and international sanctions, the IRGC relies on a fleet of aging, decrepit oil tankers.
Right.
These vessels engage in incredibly complex, dark operations. They utilize AIS spoofing.
Which is manipulating their automatic identification system transponders, right?
Yeah. Exactly. They broadcast false locations. A ship might appear to be in the Gulf of Oman on radar, while physically it's loading oil at Karg Island.
That's incredibly deceptive.
Then they sail out into the middle of the ocean, turn off their transponders completely, and engage in highly dangerous ship-to-ship transfers of crude oil.
Usually to Chinese-owned vessels in the dead of night, the sources note.
Yep. They constantly hop flags, registering the ship in Panama 1 month and Liberia the next through a labyrinth of shell companies.
It's basically an international shell game.
It is, and this allows them to smuggle massive quantities of oil, primarily to independent teapot refineries in China, totally bypassing the global banking system and U.S. oversight.
And where does that money go?
The billions of dollars generated never enter the official Iranian treasury. It goes straight to the IRGC to fund regional proxies, ballistic missile development, and the internal security apparatus.
Wow.
Imagine the formal Iranian economy, the one everyday citizens interact with, as a plant above ground.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Because of the blockade, the horrific inflation, and the war, the leaves are withered. The stem is brittle. To the outside world, the plant looks completely dead.
Right.
But the IRGC shadow economy is a massive invasive root system stretching deep underground.
Ah, I see where you're going.
The U.S. and Europe can hack away at the withered leaves all day long with sanctions, but those roots are tapping into hidden aquifers, the shadow fleet, and Chinese smuggling routes, keeping the core of the regime fully hydrated and operational.
That's a perfect way to visualize it. They have effectively decoupled the survival of the regime from the economic prosperity of the general population.
Which brings us to the Iranian people.
Yes, the civilians.
If the regime is insulated, what about the millions of civilians living under this 73% inflation and war damage?
They are suffering immensely.
A grid this isolated has to have a breaking point. It raises a debate mentioned in the sources. Why doesn't the U.S. or Israel just bomb Iran's power grid?
Right.
Turn the lights out, shut down the water, and force the population to overthrow the government?
I mean, it sounds like a clean, logical military solution from the outside.
Yeah, it does.
But the strategic analysis in the documents shows it would be a catastrophic failure.
Why?
The Iranian electrical grid is intentionally designed to thwart a decapitation strike. It is a mosaic defense.
A mosaic defense? What does that mean?
The country relies on between 130 and 160 power plants widely dispersed across the massive mountainous geography of Iran, heavily fueled by abundant domestic natural gas.
So there is no single central hub you can bomb to trigger a nationwide blackout.
Precisely. If you bomb 20 power plants, you might plunge a few provinces into darkness, but the rest of the grid just reroutes.
Just resilient.
And more importantly, consider who actually suffers when the grid goes down.
The people.
Right.
Yeah.
If you knock out power, you immediately shut down water desalination plants, which are critical for civilian survival in an arid climate.
Oh, of course.
You shut down hospitals, sewage treatment, and civilian food refrigeration.
While the IRGC bases and missile silos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
IRGC command bunkers, the nuclear facilities, the military bases, they all have deeply buried, hardened, off-grid backup generators.
So the military's fine.
They will keep functioning perfectly while the civilian population suffers immensely.
That's brutal.
Furthermore, destroying civilian infrastructure risks triggering a powerful rally-round-the-flag effect.
Which is exactly what you don't want if you're trying to incite a revolution.
Right. The regime can point to the smoking ruins of a civilian power plant and tell the population, "We told you the West doesn't want to liberate you, they want to exterminate you."
It provides the perfect scapegoat for all the economic misery they've caused.
Exactly. It backfires completely.
That being said, the domestic situation inside Iran is anything but stable.
Oh, it's highly volatile.
The sources describe the country as a massive pressure cooker. In December 2025 and January 2026, right before the ceasefire, massive protests erupted.
And these were not just isolated student protests, which is key. These involved massive strikes in the bazaars, the traditional merchant class that historically forms the economic backbone of the country.
But the regime's response was characteristic of the IRGC, wasn't it?
It was absolute brutal suppression. Thousands of protesters were killed in the streets. Tens of thousands were thrown into prisons.
Just horrifying.
The state implemented.
What leverage do they actually have, according to these sources?
They possess immense leverage in the realm of information warfare.
How so?
Diaspora networks are the ones smuggling VPNs into the country to bypass the regime's internet firewalls.
Which is crucial for communication.
Exactly. They operate independent satellite news stations like Iran International, beaming uncensored information directly into Iranian living rooms.
Oh, wow.
They meticulously document human rights abuses, identify IRGC commanders involved in crackdowns, and intensively lobby Western governments to maintain crushing sanctions.
So they're highly active.
Yes, they organize massive, coordinated global rallies to ensure the world does not look away from the domestic abuses.
But they have critical limitations, don't they?
They do, unfortunately. The diaspora is politically deeply fractured.
Fractured how?
Well, you have monarchists advocating for the return of the Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, clashing fiercely with Republican, secular, and leftist factions.
So they can't agree on a unified vision.
Right. They cannot agree on what a post-Islamic Republic Iran should look like.
Which weakens their impact.
And fundamentally, the analysis in the documents stresses a harsh reality. While the diaspora can apply external pressure and sustain the morale of internal dissidents, any true collapse of the regime must be organic and driven from within.
The people inside have to do it.
Yes. If diaspora groups lobby too aggressively for foreign military intervention, the regime simply weaponizes that.
They paint internal protesters as agents of foreign intelligence services.
Exactly, using it to justify further executions.
Let's recap this reality check because it's pretty bleak.
It is.
Bombing the power grid won't break the regime. It just hurts civilians. The domestic protests are ruthlessly suppressed by an entrenched, decentralized security apparatus.
Right.
And the diaspora, despite its incredible efforts, cannot engineer a revolution from thousands of miles away.
No, they can't.
So if the ceasefire collapses entirely, what happens next? Does the Pentagon have a secret break glass in case of emergency plan?
This leads us directly into the strategic wargaming of the extremes detailed in the documents.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Military planners outline two massive hypothetical scenarios for what happens if diplomacy totally fails.
And the first one.
The first is a highly idealized, best-case military scenario known as Operation Iron Resolve.
Walk us through the mechanics of Iron Resolve. How does this hypothetical sudden collapse actually play out?
So Iron Resolve is a tabletop exercise imagining a rapid, systemic regime implosion triggered by overwhelming precise force.
Overwhelming force.
Yes. The scenario begins with the U.S. and Israel launching a synchronized stealth and cyber assault of unprecedented scale.
Unprecedented scale, what does that mean?
We are talking hundreds of sorties packed into a 48-hour window,
Yeah.
utilizing B-21 Raiders and F-35s.
Show us what that looks like on the ground.
The cyber assault hits first. SCADA systems controlling traffic lights, communications, and power to military bases in Tehran are suddenly bricked.
Just total digital blackout.
Right, radar screens go blank. Then the stealth bombers arrive. And what do they hit?
They simultaneously strike deeply buried IRGC command and control bunkers, drone manufacturing facilities, and the remnants of the nuclear sites at Natanz and Fordo.
But the immediate reaction from Iran wouldn't be surrender.
No, of course not.
It would be a massive barrage of ballistic missiles and Shahed drones aimed at Israel, U.S. Navy assets, and the Gulf states.
Yeah, exactly. But Iron Resolve relies on a critical technological twist dubbed the Ukraine Shield.
The Ukraine Shield, what is that?
In this scenario, Ukraine, having spent years fighting off relentless waves of Russian and Iranian drones, has secretly co-produced highly advanced AI-driven drone hunting technology and electronic warfare pods.
Oh, fascinating.
They share this tech with the U.S. and the Gulf states. So when Iran launches its retaliatory swarm, the Ukraine Shield activates.
And what does it do?
Electronic warfare pods sever the GPS links of the Shahed drones. Advanced acoustic sensors track the incoming missiles.
And the interception rate?
The interception rate hits an astonishing 85 to 95%.
The Iranian counterstrike, meant to set the region on fire, effectively fizzles out.
The psychological impact of that would be devastating. It shatters the myth of the IRGC's deterrence entirely.
That psychological blow is what triggers the collapse.
Right.
In this war game, the demoralized IRGC forces begin to fragment. Local commanders realize communication with Tehran is severed and refuse to deploy.
And the regular army.
Crucially, the conventional army, the Artesh, refuses orders to fire on protesting civilians.
That's the turning point.
Yes. The Bazaars launch a general strike, freezing whatever is left of the economy. Within 10 days, Mojtaba Khamenei realizes the security apparatus is evaporated.
So he flees.
He flees the country, and a secular transitional council takes control.
I mean, it sounds like a geopolitical fairy tale.
And that is exactly how the analysts frame it in the sources.
So it's not realistic.
It is a highly idealized, exceptionally low probability scenario requiring flawless execution and immense luck.
Because real regime collapses don't work like that. Exactly. Real-world regime collapses. Think of Iraq in 2003 or Libya in 2011 do not end with neat transitional councils and peaceful handovers of power.
They usually result in years of chaos.
Years, often decades, of chaotic, violent civil war, competing militias, and massive power vacuums.
So even the best extreme case is a monumental gamble. What is the worst case scenario? What happens if the fragile ceasefire collapses and the region spirals out of control?
The worst-case scenario is a multi-front regional conflagration that triggers a global economic doomsday.
Doomsday.
Yes. If kinetic strikes resume, Iran fully activates its proxy network. Hezbollah launches tens of thousands of rockets at Israeli civilian centers.
And the Houthis?
The Houthis completely blockade the Red Sea, sinking commercial shipping indiscriminately.
That's already bad enough.
But the absolute nightmare move is Iran deciding to target Gulf energy infrastructure directly.
If they take the view of, if we cannot export our oil, nobody in the Middle East will export their oil.
Precisely. They launch swarms of cruise missiles and drones at the Abqaiq processing facility in Saudi Arabia, which is huge.
It is the most critical oil node on the planet.
Yeah.
And they also hit the massive LNG export terminals in Qatar.
And if those facilities burn?
The math changes instantly. Oil doesn't just spike to $100. It skyrockets to $150, maybe $200 a barrel.
The economic modeling for that is just apocalyptic.
It truly is. The Gulf states, which anchor the economy of the broader Middle East, would face GDP contractions of up to 22%.
22%.
The global economy would immediately enter a severe recession. We circle back to the fertilizer crisis. At $200 a barrel, ammonia production halts globally.
Leading to mass starvation.
Yes, mass starvation across emerging markets. Geopolitically, the United States becomes entirely consumed by a Middle Eastern quagmire.
Draining all their resources.
Draining resources and political capital, leaving them completely distracted from managing great power competition with China in the Indo-Pacific and Russia in Eastern Europe.
It is a systemic shock that permanently alters global power dynamics.
Permanently.
With those extremes laid out, the fantasy of iron resolve versus the nightmare of global economic doomsday, let's bring this analysis back to the ground.
Back to the reality of the documents.
Right. Back to the geopolitical reality of May 2026. How does this specific standoff actually end?
When analysts synthesize all the military, economic, and political factors in these sources, they conclude that a grinding, unsatisfactory attrition is the most likely outcome.
Grinding attrition.
Yeah. Total victory is impossible for the U.S. without triggering a doomsday scenario, and total defeat is unacceptable for Iran.
So we should expect a messy compromise.
Yeah, exactly. We should expect a phased, highly imperfect diplomatic fudge.
A diplomatic fudge.
The deal will not resolve the grand strategic problems. It will focus entirely on a gradual, agonizingly slow reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
Tied to those multinational escorts and partial demining efforts we talked about.
Yes.
What about the nuclear issue? That was the catalyst for the February strikes in the first place.
There will likely be technical compromises. Iran might agree to dilute a portion of its highly enriched uranium stockpile down to lower purities.
But they keep the infrastructure.
Absolutely. They will absolutely retain the core scientific knowledge and physical infrastructure to enrich again.
And in exchange for that dilution.
In exchange, the U.S. will quietly lift the naval blockade, allowing Iran's shadow fleet to export oil and keep the regime solvent.
And then the spin machine's going to overdrive, I'm sure.
Oh, completely. Both sides will declare absolute victory.
How does the U.S. spin it?
President Trump will address the nation, claiming a massive, historic triumph for reopening the strait, degrading the IRGC's capabilities, and single-handedly saving the global economy from depression.
And Iran.
Meanwhile, the IRGC will blanket Iranian state media with claims of a glorious victory of resistance.
Because they survived.
Exactly.
Right.
They will argue that the simple act of surviving an unprovoked assault by the world's greatest superpower is divine proof of the Islamic Revolution's legitimacy.
But underneath the spin, the core issues remain completely unresolved.
Completely unresolved.
Iran's nuclear ambitions are merely paused, and the catastrophic vulnerability of global maritime choke points is just kicked down the road for another administration to deal with.
It is the geopolitical equivalent of taking an aspirin for a brain tumor.
Wow, that's dark.
The immediate symptom of the closed strait is relieved, but the underlying disease continues to fester and grow.
Let's take a moment to recap the immense ground we've covered today.
Yeah, it's been a lot.
You, the listener, now hopefully understand the terrifying mathematics of the Strait of Hormuz, how removing 20 million barrels of oil and a fifth of the world's LNG threatens to carve trillions out of the global economy.
Trillions.
You see exactly why a trillion-dollar military cannot simply blast its way through a cluttered, shallow waterway filled with acoustic mines.
It's just the wrong tool.
You have peered into the fortress of the Iranian regime, seeing how the IRGC's shadow economy, their smuggling fleets, and a decentralized power grid insulate the leadership from sanctions and bombs alike.
They are deeply entrenched.
And you understand the incredibly fragile diplomatic tightrope the world is currently walking to prevent a regional doomsday.
It's a precarious situation.
As we conclude this analysis, there is a profound, paradigm-shifting concept embedded in all of these sources that we want you to carefully consider.
Yes, this is the really big takeaway.
For decades, the entire globalized economy has rested on a single, unquestioned foundational premise: the absolute dominance of the United States Navy.
The guarantee of global free trade.
Exactly. The belief that if a problem arises anywhere in the world, a U.S. carrier strike group will arrive and ensure the sea lanes remain open.
But this crisis has fundamentally shattered that illusion.
It has.
It has proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that a heavily sanctioned, economically isolated, and militarily degraded nation does not need a fleet of aircraft carriers to bring the world to its knees.
So they just don't.
Using nothing more than cheap underwater mines, aging speedboats, and commercial drones, they effectively held 20% of the global economy hostage.
And they forced the wealthiest nations on Earth to stop shooting and come to the negotiating table.
So the chilling question you have to ask yourself is this: if cheap, asymmetric weapons can successfully neutralize trillion-dollar navies in the Strait of Hormuz today,
Right.
what does this mean for the future of every other critical choke point on the globe?
Think about it. From the Strait of Malacca to the Panama Canal, the blueprint for holding the global economy hostage has now been written.
Will the very concept of freedom of the seas even exist in a decade?
The era of unquestioned maritime dominance might just be over. Thank you for joining us on this extensive deep dive. We invite you to share your own sources for our next exploration as we continue to map out the rapidly changing realities of our world.